These stones, some of them over 500 years old, each one tells a story of belief, of perseverance. This is not only a memorial, but an archive, miraculously preserved in a modern European capital. This is the old Jewish cemetery in Prague. There are close to 12,000 stones on the surface, but the number of people buried here is much higher.
The capacity of the cemetery was too small to bury everybody. And that's why the bodies were buried in layers. So, first layer was completed, second layer was completed, and the other layers. And the stones always were lifted up on the surface. So all the stones from all the layers were lifted on the surface, and that's why stones are very close one to each other.
The number of people buried here may be as high as 100,000.
The oldest one belongs to Avigdor Kara. It was a very famous person, a man that survived one of the biggest pogroms, big attacks against Jews that happened here in the old town of Prague in the end of 14th century, 1389.
They stormed the tombs and the graveyards where the bones of our noble forefathers rest. They smashed the tombstones. They looked for more treasures. They robbed the dead, desecrating the corpses in their eternal bed. It caused them no scruples, the skeletons to break.
When you want to understand the situation in the Jewish cemetery, you have to understand the situation in the Jewish ghetto, because the conditions there were very similar. There were overcrowding in both places. Just to have some idea, there lived 550 people on 1 acre. So the same amount of people lived in the Christian part of the old town of Prague and the ghetto. Just on this area, orange, lived the same amount of people like on this area. This is the old town of Prague. This is the Jewish ghetto. In this area lived roughly 11,000 people, and here live something like 12,000 people. The people lived in cramped conditions and lived in this way even after their death. So the same situation on the earth and under the earth.
Lo mir gehen mit stille Tritt, keiner soll nicht hören. Lo mir nicht dem süßen Schlaf von dem Niederstehren. Efter träumt ein alter Mann wegen junge Jahren. Und ist in Träum aufs Nei jung und stark geworden. Efter träumt ein arm Kind wegen Brot mit Butter. Und es tullet sich in Schlaf zu der kranken Mutter. Efter träumt ein kranker Mensch von gesund und Leben. Und es kommt zu ihm die Nacht, a Fuhr gehen.
When I lived in Prague back in the 80s, there were no visitors at the cemetery and no marked paths. It used to be very quiet there, and I would roam alone among the tombstones. There was something that kept me coming back, as if the stones were talking to me, as if they were trying to tell me something, and I was trying to understand it. Their voices sounded familiar to me. They spoke a language buried somewhere deep in my memory. What is it? What are they trying to tell us?
Plenty of the tombstones are definitely not visible here, because there are 12,000 tombstones these days that we can count, but there must be another thousands of tombstones which are not visible because they are underneath the ground, buried together with the layers of people who are buried around here. And then, even from those 12,000 that we have here now, many of them you can't read, maybe 2/3, maybe even 3/4. If you look at these, you can't definitely read them. There are different types of stones, different materials that they were using, and also, of course, different styles. The blackish ones are some of the oldest. So we said that the first people were buried here already from the early 15th century. So some of these black tombstones, they easily go to 1500. Then came the period of Renaissance, and a very typical Renaissance tombstone is this one, with the triangle shape on the top of it, not having too many of ornaments on them. And then these were followed by the period of Baroque, and also the style of Baroque pretty much reflected itself in the tombstones. Look at these two. These are two very, very beautiful examples of Baroque tombstones.
A pair of blessing hands marks the grave of a Kohen, a descendant of the Hebrew priests. The graves of their assistants, the Levites, have a pitcher and a basin. Scissors for a tailor, grapes for fertility and wisdom. Pictures of animals appear on the gravestones of those with animal surnames. A fish for Fischl or Karpeles, a deer for Hirsch, a lion for Judah.
Here is buried HaChasid, a pious one, Morenu Haraf Reb, our master, teacher, rabbi, a man whose name was David Gantz. And now I think that abbreviation stands for the name of the book, exactly. Baal Tzemach David, one of the earliest Jewish chronicles that we have in Prague.
What about the goose? Does it stand for his name?
Obviously, the shape of the Magen David, of the Star of David or Shield of David, is representing his first name, while the symbol of the animal, goose, represents Gantz, his surname. This was supposed to be, that's what the legend says, the shape of the shield of King David. Whenever he went to the battle, he was probably protecting himself with a sort of a shield that was supposed to be in this shape. Here, it was for the first time ever that the Star of David was used officially as a representing emblem of the Jewish community.
Basically, most of the stones from 16th century were made in this Prague stonemakers guild. The inscription and the decoration and the signs were drawn by knowledge of a rabbi, because the stonemaker doesn't know the letters, doesn't know Hebrew.
Can you explain why specifically this cemetery has such a rich architecture, rich symbolics?
No, Prague was the biggest community. Prague was like it was the center, Jewish center. It was really big center of Jewish life in Europe from late 16th century. It's like something which has meaning for Jews like I don't know, Westminster Abbey for English.
The history of Prague's Jewish town is a story of persecution and exile. In 1561, there was a royal decree forcing conversion of the Jews or their departure from the Kingdom of Bohemia. They withstood the temptation to convert, leaving the cities of Bohemia between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. The Jews were expelled from Prague, twice by Emperor Ferdinand I in the 16th century, and 200 years later by Empress Maria Theresa, notorious for her bitter hatred of the Jews. Each expulsion order was rescinded once it was realized how vital a role the Jews played in the state economy. Time and again, the Jews were able to withstand the successive trials and catastrophes.
When the empress ordered their expulsion, the Jewish community went to the cemetery in solemn procession to ask the dead to intervene. Here lie those who, by an emperor's decree, had to wear a yellow circle over their hearts as a symbol of shame, and those forced to take an oath standing on the skin of a pig. Here lie those ordered to attend weekly Jesuit sermons, and those forced to live behind a gated wall. Despite expulsions, devastating fires, and merciless attacks by mobs, adherence to tradition was so great that Jews persevered over the centuries. The most visited site in the cemetery marks the grave of the Maharal, our teacher, the Rabbi Lowy, the greatest and most influential thinker of the Prague ghetto. It is written that emperors and kings spoke of him with respect, that all learned men were his friends.
He symbolized the spiritual life of Judaism in the period of Middle Ages and partially in the period of the Renaissance. And I think he is one of the greatest Jewish personality in the history of Jewish civilization. First of all, Rabbi Lev is a religious thinker. What is the greatest sin of man? It is to think that he is cause, and he is not cause, he is effect of the activity of God. Each man is born with his little aggressive soul, but it is necessary to sublimate and to live in human society. In this ideal world, it doesn't exist the aggressivity, or the aggressivity is sublimated a little, and each nation and all people, they live in mutual respect. The result is that all nations should be free. It is no right to oppress another nation. Each nation should be free because each nation was created by God as one special nation. So each nation should live in mutual respect. He is very traditional, very ancient, and very modern as well.
It is told that when the emperor issued a proclamation ordering all Jews to leave Prague, the great Rabbi Lowy went to the Charles Bridge to wait for the emperor's carriage to pass. A crowd threw mud and stones to drive the rabbi away. The mud and stones turned to flowers in midair. Suddenly, instead of trampling the rabbi, the horses stopped short. Impressed, the emperor revoked the cruel decree. Of the many legends associated with Rabbi Lowy, the best known is that of the Golem.
When the ghetto of Prague was being attacked, when it seemed that the end had finally come, the great Rabbi Lowy went into the street, stopped before a heap of clay in front of the teacher's house, and molded a clay image. He blew into the nose of the golem, and it began to stir. Then he whispered the name into its ear, and our golem left the ghetto. The rabbi returned to the house of prayer, and the golem fell upon our enemies.
The magic formula by which the golem could be called to life has long been forgotten. But in the streets of Prague, the legend lives. Armies of golems wait to be summoned.
A proto právě, když vám ji neřeknu, tak to skoro vůbec nevadí. A je tu ovšem ještě verze pátá, ale ta není doložená. Podle ní ta teta byla táta a golem byla jeho žena. Podle této verze celý příběh úplně by se nám otočil. Takže bude nejlíp míti za to, že se golem přec jen rozmočil.
So this is where the ghetto was beginning. Somewhere around here. But the ghetto isn't here anymore. The ghetto disappeared somewhere in between the years 1896 to 1914. The ghetto became a slum. It became a poor quarter of the poorest inhabitants of Prague. So the idea was that demolishing the ghetto, they would get rid of all of these problems. The houses were dilapidated, there was a lack of sewerage and drainage system, there was constant problem with flooding, all the diseases that it brought along. So on its side, the newly built Art Nouveau buildings showed up, and since that time, this became one of the most fashionable areas of Prague. What you look at today is the size of the sidewalk only. This used to be the size of a street once in the past. So it was much narrower than it is today. The ghetto was supposed to be demolished entirely, and what they managed to save at the end was at least a couple of the synagogues.
This is the famous place where Golem is buried?
Alt Neu Shul, Old New Synagogue. Up there he is sleeping. So this is the only place how you can get to the attic.
Have you checked it out?
Not yet, but it is on my agenda.
There are hundreds of legends about Prague's beloved Alt Neu Shul, or Old New Synagogue. It is said to have been built by angels, with stones from the destroyed temple in Jerusalem. Stones borrowed on condition that they be returned someday. Many times the old synagogue was saved by miracles. Whenever flames threatened to engulf it, white doves appeared on the tiled roof, beating their wings to blow out the blaze.
The Kaddish is a very special prayer because most prayers we say in Hebrew. And this short prayer is written, we are saying it in Aramaic. It's a very special language. It's the language that the angels don't understand. It means it's a secret language that a Jew can speak with God without the angels will know what he's speaking about. But the meaning of Kaddish is when a Jew is passing away, we're missing his light. So we want not to miss it and to say some prayer that will keep his Kaddish, his holiness that he gave us during his life.
The Prague Jewish Burial Society, or Hevra Kadisha, was founded in 1564. Its principles: proper reverence must be paid to the deceased, and no profit should be made from the burial of the dead.
If it is clear that someone is close to death, members of the burial society remain with him to the end. In accordance with Jewish law, burial must take place as soon as possible, preferably on the day of death. Once they are informed of the death, members of the burial society make a simple coffin of unplaned boards, dig a grave, and prepare the shroud. The most significant act is the ritual washing of the body. The rabbi delivers a funeral speech over the body. On the way to the grave, the cantor recites Psalm 91 7 times, which stresses the reliance on God's protection in times of need. On leaving, all the funeral guests ritually wash their hands.
The just and cherished commandment must be kept by the members of the Holy Brotherhood, passed on from generation to generation. And the sons will walk in the ways of the Father after all the trials and tribulations of the time that have unfolded over the years. The princes of the community pledged that all this would remain binding for us and our children and for all the generations of Israel that settled in the community of Prague.
In Rabbi Loewy's time, everyone avoided passing by the synagogue in the hours after midnight. It was believed that in the darkness the dead gathered there to pray. Never afraid, Rabbi Loewy would return to the synagogue at any hour. One night, he stumbled upon the angel of death, studying the names of the doomed. The rabbi tore the list from him and ripped it to shreds. But a piece remained in the angel of death's skeleton hand, with just a single name upon it. Rabbi Loewy died the next morning. Legend has it that Rabbi Loewy's tombstone moved itself to make room for his grandson's grave. As the centuries passed, Rabbi Loewy's fame grew, not as an important thinker, but as a kind of magician who performed miracles.
You already closed? To Rabbi Loewy's grave before my wedding.
No.
Please, just for 1 minute. Please let us in. I just want to write a little note. My wedding is tomorrow and I will not get married without it.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Thanks.
Even today, visitors leave messages on Rabbi Loewy's tomb in the hope that he will intercede on their behalf in heaven.
Vítám vás všechny k obřadu svatebnímu tohoto páru Šlomiho a Tamary.
הרי את מקודשת לי בטבעת זו כדת משה וישראל.
אמן. מקודשת, מקודשת, מקודשת.
Mordechai Meisel was the major figure of Jewish town in 16th century, and he died 1601. And because he was real father and mayor of the town, he's the first person who got this very special kind of grave, or hell, house or home above the grave.
The noble and generous Mordecai Meisel. Can a man be found like him, whose charitable deeds and justice stand forever? He built hospitals and bathhouses, and had the streets of the Jewish town paved with stone. He was the richest man in Prague. But he always used his money for the community, for supporting the poor, for supporting Hevra Kadisha and the Jewish town hall, and a yeshiva. He built a magnificent synagogue. All big building projects in the 16th century of the golden age of the Prague ghetto were connected with this person. It was Mordecai Meisels who built the High Synagogue, still used as a daily house of prayer.
This old Jewish cemetery keeps within itself the memory of generations, the continuity with the passage of time. You can see it in the tombstones. Time somehow breathes out of them. I dare say the cemetery is time embedded in eternity.
Although large, imposing gravestones were reserved only for distinguished men, the tomb of Hendel Bershevi is an exception. She was the wife of the first Czech Jewish nobleman. So ornate is her tomb, it was rumored a Jewish queen was buried there. It is the only tomb with a freestanding sculpture.
The first rule in Jewish art is not to depict human figures or faces. And not only human, but also animal figures. But in the case of the tombstones, since the 16th century, this rule wasn't followed. And there are the figures or the pictures of the girls or women dressed and naked or semi-naked. In these pictures, in the books of Haggadah usually, such a woman figure is sitting on a seashore and covering by her hands a number of small figures. Such a figure is protecting the descendants of Abraham. There is a figure of a woman which is half naked in this position of the mother protecting the child. It is marble, 1674, and her name was Gittel or Gitla. Also under the influence of the drawings in the books. Instead of protecting by him, so the hands are given like this. Maybe as a symbol of it that she died childless. Maybe. This is the tombstone belonging to Rivka Tikotin or Tiktin. She died in the year 1605. It is a typical Renaissance style, which is called a portal. And she worked especially among the women of the Prague ghetto. She taught them the rules of hygiene, and she also wrote a special book called Jewish Women. The book is called Meneket Rivka in Hebrew. It means the wet nurse of Rivka. The Jewish women of that time could read. At least they had to know Hebrew letters or Hebrew characters to read prayers. In any case, she's a very interesting person of the time in the Prague ghetto.
Rivka, may her soul be bound in the bundle of life. Day and night she preached to the women in the city of the faithful. Tears were shed by all who came and went as she was buried and hidden in the earth.
The object of my work is to put together the ultimate database of the old Jewish cemetery in Prague by combining available sources that we have from manuscripts, databases, published catalogs, and photographs. In short, the result will be the database. There are transcripts of all 12,000 tombstones, including those where the cemetery was destroyed during urban renewal. So far, I have scanned in approximately 9,000 pictures. 3,000 are still to be done. Add to that about 2,000 more negatives showing unidentified stones and fragments. It is such a school of life compared to other cemeteries. It is an incredible source of forgotten poetry. One creates a strong bond after working on it for such a long time. The personal relationship is there for sure.
Do you ever take your kids there?
Not yet. They are only 2.5 years old. But they will go, for sure.
The cemetery was abandoned for a long period of time, and all tombstones were heavily damaged by air pollution. Air pollution and also vandalism from the past. Anybody could enter the cemetery, so there were a lot of damages in the whole area of the cemetery. If you came in early 90s here, you could see a lot of tombstones laying on the ground, and some of them, or a lot of them, were broken into pieces like this one. So first stage of our work here, our job here, was just to collect the pieces of stones, and we were looking for the rest and trying to find the pieces that fit together. We tried to move all standing, but Prague rabbi in the beginning of our work didn't want us to move it. Then slowly we started to move it a little bit to more standing position, but never as like soldiers in a row. So it's first step of restoration. We have to clean all surface, and from this reason we have to apply this poultice. We call it poultice, very soft chemical agent. It's very slow. So now we rub the poultice to prevent evaporation of water. We will leave like that for a duration of 2 or 3 days. After consolidation, filling gaps and cleaning, we can read this tombstone as a result of our work.
It is like archive. Each stone is like page of the book, and I think people used to understand it like that, to put your name in the stone and the basic information about the life and about even profession and about the relation. And he goes to the synagogue often, but also say by the scholars the titles of the books they have written, to write his most important messages in the stone, to survive and to sign the grave.
This tree was about 60 years old and it was very ill. And it's very dangerous for people and for stones. If it's very windy or some storm, the tree can go down. We must have agreement of a lot of institutions, especially institutions for heritage and for protecting environment. For us, it's a very hard decision to cut every tree. But it is necessary. Really, this tree was necessary to cut down.
During 10 months of a devastating plague epidemic in the years 1679 and 1680, the Jewish community was granted permission to bury its dead in a field in the Zhishkov quarter, a mile away from the town. In 1787, when for sanitary reasons all burials within the city were banned, the Zhishkov cemetery replaced the old Jewish cemetery as the Jewish community's burial ground. Under the communists in 1960, tombstones were knocked over and buried under mounds of soil to create a public park. 20 years later, most of the graves were excavated and the tombstones carted away to make room for a futuristic television tower. Protests by the Prague Jewish community were ignored. At the end of the 19th century, the Prague Burial Society acquired land for another cemetery, the New Cemetery. Jewish burials take place here to this day. Many of the family headstones are half blank. Missing are the names of those murdered by the Nazis. Names that will never be engraved. From 1942 to 1945, the Nazis confiscated religious and other family possessions of their Jewish victims from all over the country and sent them to Prague. There, a small group of Jews was forced to sort and catalogue these possessions under the watchful eyes of the Nazis. Miraculously, the old Jewish cemetery in Prague was spared, as was the Altneu Schule and the Pinkas Synagogue.
Along the walls are painted the names of 77,290 people. Jewish men, women, and children from Bohemia and Moravia who were deported by the Nazis. Graves on a tiny piece of wall.
In year 41, I was 6 years old. My father came home with a big piece of yellow fabric full of stars. Then we put to each coat and shared these yellow stars. And so in that time, I realized that there are some differences between people and that we are different. The one of them, which was my own, I have still all the time.
And you carry that everywhere now?
Yeah, because it's a very important part of my memory. I know that here should be many of my relatives because about 46% of my family didn't came back, didn't survive. This is a sister of my father. And this is cousin of my father. This is brother of my father. And this is my cousin, because that is his son. So, such a big amount of names.
During the Nazi protectorate, when Jews were barred from all public parks, the only place Jewish children were allowed to play out of doors was in a cemetery. Jewish mothers would walk with their baby carriages among the stones.
It was the only park where Jewish children could go and play. It was very emotional. When the weather was nice and the sun was shining, children used to run and play here, as it was the only way to play and live, to be outside at all. The situation was very bad, particularly in the beginning before they got used to it.
In the 50s and beginning of the 60s, it was our playground. I think I was maybe 5-6 years old. So immediately we started to play hide and seek. Mystery was, screaming at us from every corner, but we were never afraid. We were never afraid of the dead. Well, some of the stones were basically the same height as we were, right? So we started to play and we couldn't see each other. Sometimes we lost each other. during the games. After we were a little bit older, we still would use the cemetery as a park for different reasons. So we would sit there leaning towards the tombstones and kissing each other. It was very natural to us. I've heard several times that someone had sex there with somebody else. But I remember it was so thrilling and so scary for us.
For our generation that grew up under communism, the cemetery represented paradoxically our first live contact with Judaism. We had no other Jewish life. From this stems the relationship of the current generation of the Jewish community towards the cemetery. A feeling of responsibility for what was there and for the heritage that simply fell into our hands.
Last year we had 640,000 visitors, and I suppose that all of them went through the old Jewish cemetery.
300, 500 and your ticket, yeah? Thank you.
In order to get into the cemetery, you have to buy a group ticket to get into other locations.
600 and your ticket, yeah? Thank you.
I don't understand why I have to pay almost 300 crowns for a ticket to the Jewish cemetery.
We cannot divide Jewish Museum in Prague in parts. So of course, we offer visit to synagogues. We offer to see rare Jewish artifacts, to learn about Jewish history, customs, and traditions. And the old Jewish cemetery is an integral part of the Jewish Museum.
Such a huge number of people coming through, you would have to pay a lot just to keep it the way it is. So, of course, you charge money for it.
All these activities must be financed, and we are not linked to the state budget.
I remember, it used to be unbelievably easy to walk among the tombstones. It had its own atmosphere. Frankly, the last time I was there was 6 years ago. I miss it as I speak about it. I just go around it.
I do feel that it's kind of a shame that most of the Jewish property is used as a museum, or it's not used at all, basically. If it wouldn't be for the Second World War, there would be 100,000 Jews in Prague, and they would be using all this. And today, there is no one to use it.
It's a very solemn experience. It really brings home a lot of feelings that you probably don't visit on an everyday about the whole Jewish experience and what's involved with it.
I don't know, it's just a feeling. It's kind of peaceful in there, but at the same time there's so many people that you just don't realise how many people are there, and you see all the tombstones and they're just jumbled and there's no order to anything.
They're like, people are stacked on top of each other.
If you've never been here, you should see it. It's most impressive.
A great community lives here, and one part of my family died when I come from here. So for me, who live in France, it's very symbolic to imagine all the people who came here in Prague and live here for a long time. And all they shared here, and now we're here now, so it was important for me just to be here, but I'm just a small person. Thank you.
You know the saying which is on each of the graves from Middle Ages, which is very nice.
May his soul be bound in the bundle of life, something like that.
Yes. May his soul be bound in the bundle of life. In Jewish tradition, we don't speak about the future life, what will happen and how it will look. But Maimonides wrote that we have to believe in resurrection, and in the same time he wrote that we shouldn't think much about it because Judaism is a religion of life, and death is about your life. Thanks to gravestones, you can see always the number of people and the relation between them. If somebody which is very close to you died, and somebody who knows you all your life, then after some time, you just have this feeling that he is still living, but somewhere else.